Elsa Forstner, and my pronouns are she, her. I work for Student Academic Success Services, and I'll be moderating this session today. If you have any questions at any point, please message me in the chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that chat for questions for our panelists as well. So I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from my home in Kingston, which is on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And when I was preparing for this session and thinking about acculturation and the process of settling into a new culture, a new context, I reflected on the connection with the land and how that's part of that process. And whenever you find yourself in a new space, the land itself and the physical location, the geography of where you are is such a big part of that process. And I think for myself, it's easier to be more aware of the land that I'm on when it's land that is new to me, land that is perhaps unfamiliar or culturally very different from what I'm used to. But I think, you know, it's very important for us to take time to the land where we live and to think about how we navigate that space and whose space it is and who has access to that space and who informs that space and shapes that space. And so I encourage you to reflect on the land where you find yourself and maybe bring some fresh awareness to how you engage with that space and whose space it is and how you understand your role within that space. So if you joined us right at the beginning, then you heard me say we've been unfortunately having some technical difficulties. So we have two of our wonderful panelists here today. We may be joined by another two. There seem to be some issues, so that might be a pleasant surprise mid-panel. But if it ends up being just the three of us, that will be wonderful as well. So I'm joined today by Anna Fouks and Unju Sun, and I'm going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves a little bit more. And so I'd like to start by asking both Anna and Unju our first question, which is one of the things we want to highlight here is the diversity of internationalized and global students. You know, everybody has a different story, a different identity, and a different relationship with Canadian academic culture. So can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience as a student at Queen's, thinking about to that culture and maybe cultural differences from what you grew up with, the culture of your home. And so, Anna, why don't we start with you?
Oh, hello, everybody. As Elisa has introduced me, my name is Anna. I am currently a fourth-year student at Queen's, a major in life science and a minor in English. I personally have immigrated into Canada when I was 4 from Russia. So I have been living in Canada all my life. However, because I have had a different culture while at home with my parents and my family speaking Russian and practicing in Russian practices, it's been different from the Canadian context that surrounded me in my everyday life at school, extracurriculars, or just making friends, whichever it is. As a student at Queen's, I found it to myself to be in a very interesting position, because at the same time I have known and lived in this country enough to consider myself to be a native, a Canadian citizen, and knowing how country works. But at the same time, I was able to understand others who came from the international place, and talking about how it is to become accustomed to this space, especially to the academic systems that are placed in Canada. So it's been interesting, because at the same time, I do feel a little bit of that immigrant status of myself coming back a little bit as well, because I've been connecting with others who come from Russian speaking countries and they've been in Canada for the first time, or be that from other countries as well. So it's been an interesting experience, and I'm really happy that I've had the chance to be at Queen's long enough to have it and learn from it as well.
Thank you so much, Anna. But before we move on to Unju, I've got a bit of a follow-up question for you. We often, especially any folks in the room who are in student services, we know how important support networks are and how much students rely on parents or family members or people in their community to help them navigate the process of university. We often, acknowledge that first generation students who are the first in their family to attend university have particular challenges or needs. And then we also acknowledge that international students who are joining us from other countries have these particular challenges or needs. And I think, as I said with the original question, there's really so much diversity among internationalized or global folks. And so you are a wonderful example of how being an international student, not in the student status sense, but in the sense of your identity is international, you're this wonderful example of how not everyone fits in a very clear box. And so I'm interested in coming to university or going through the whole Canadian school system, really. How has that been for you in terms of having a support network of family who have come from another culture and maybe haven't had the same experiences as you and might not know or might have different approaches to supporting you based on their own experiences?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Lisa. It has definitely been interesting because when we first all moved to Canada together, we were all learning the English language together and being able to navigate the social contexts together. So I think in terms of having my family as a support system as it went through, it's been always a discussion. Like, for example, at school today, I've been in a situation that I wasn't completely sure how to work with. I would come home to my mom and I would discuss that situation with her, and she would either share something similar that happened to her at work or in her everyday life, and we were able to kind of discuss a solution together in an environment that was comfortable for all of us. And in terms of having a slightly different experience for acculturizing apart from my parents, because I was in the public elementary school at the time, always interacting, I was able to get rid of my accent before my parents, because I've been interacting more with the language and with its changes as it goes through time, being able to understand all the different social contexts, etc. So in that point, I could, for example, bring back something new from that language to my parents and help kind of as well them understand how to navigate with their own work relations, etc. So that has definitely been very interesting, and also going through the school system really helped me understand kind of how social relationships are made in Canada, and how it is possible to interact with others to have a more positive experience. Hopefully that answered your question. I think I have went a little bit on a sidetrack there, but
it was wonderful. Thank you so much. Great. Unju, you're coming to us from a very different context. Would you take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Eunju, pronouns she, her. So I grew up in Korea, so South Korea, and finished my undergraduate and master's degree there before I arrived in Canada in 2018 for a doctoral program. So currently I'm a fourth year PhD. and studying feminist psychology and like feminist identity and gender sex diversity. So there I felt obviously a lot of cultural differences, like academic settings in South Korea and Canada are quite different. But after 4 years, I'm a little bit getting used to it, but still working on it. So one of the things that I felt like after like I joined in Canada is that like critical thinking is very important here. And I'm like, discussion is super active and asking questions are very encouraged. But like in my culture and like in South Korean like academic setting, like you often just accept like or just like take in what is taught by your prof because like they are more experienced, they know better, they know more. But here you're kind of encouraged to challenge what is out there, and like critical thinking is super important, like it's super important like skill as like a student. But again, like in my culture, like asking like stupid questions are kind of frowned upon, and it is considered as like taking someone's really valuable time. So you have to kind of think it twice before you ask questions in class. But then here again, like asking stupid questions is better than having no questions at all. So it was so hard for me when I first arrived here. When people ask me, "What is your thought? Like, what do you think about this matter?" And I always got lost a little bit because I always needed more time than others to actually think and navigate what I really think about this material or reading material or this research. And I was not trained in that way to like critically think. And then I got this impression, I got this kind of like, I was misunderstood as like not really engaging to class. And like, so this thing is the thing that I first really like realized, oh, this is so different from what I know about what I know or what I grew up. So nowadays I try to kind of ask more questions, even if it is, I don't know, like not, even if it doesn't really sound good. And I also kind of try to explain to others that like not engaging in class or not really asking like a lot of questions doesn't mean that I'm not interested in this class, or doesn't mean that I don't really like this class or something like that. Yeah, so that is the first thing that I had to navigate when I arrived in Canada. And I'm still working on a lot of other cultural differences.
Thank you so much. I think, you know, your experience is one that's probably shared by many international students. And your story reminds me of how often it's students with international or intercultural backgrounds who have this awareness of cultural differences that maybe their peers who were born and raised in the local culture don't have. If everyone around you is always acting like you and interacting in the same way you do, it feels like the norm or like the universal way. And so I think, you know, in my work with international students, I see that there's this heightened awareness about these differences. And so you've kind of touched on this, Unju, but I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to your experience maybe with intercultural miscommunication, maybe, you know, as you said in class discussions, this is something you've experienced, but how have you navigated this? Or is there anything perhaps that you wish your Canadian counterparts knew or did differently to improve the intercultural discussions in your coursework or your program overall?
Well, speaking of like another cultural differences, so in my culture, I think we give like I think I need to give some context before I do this. So I am a PhD student, so I do TA work, so teaching assessment thing. So I grade people's assignments, like students' assignments. And in my culture, I think like we like teachers or TAs give feedback more about like what you need to improve on rather than like what you're good at. So personally, I don't really remember receiving any like super good compliments in my assignments, not because I'm a bad student. I was a good student, but like, and my teachers knew that. But when they grade my assignment, it was more focused on like what I can do better than what I've done well already. So when I first graded like students' assignments, I probably was too harsh on my comments in that sense to them, because I only commented on what they can do better rather than like, and didn't really say about like what you did good. Like, this is, yeah, right. So I was like, if I didn't comment on the intro, that means your intro is already good. Like I didn't comment on it. It means it's good. But now I know that if I think that intro is good, then I should probably comment on that, like something like good intro, like I like the sentence or something like that. So now I do that, but I feel kind of sorry for students who I met in my first TA class because I was probably too harsh on them. Something that I wish that like other like Canadian counterparts knew is that I think this is not only my experience, it's like kind of a shared experience from probably like people from East Asian culture. And there are a lot of East Asian like TAs in this school and in my program. And I wish there was some kind of like acculturation, like TA acculturation thing, because I didn't finish my undergraduate in like North American setting. So I don't really know the TA roles of, in these schools. So when I first like started this job, I kind of find it hard to navigate through like what my role is, what is the expectation, like what like students often expect from their TAs. So, but I didn't really had any chance to learn all that. I wish I had the experience, because if I had that one, then I would probably have known about this cultural differences, and probably would have like written my feedback a little bit like differently, probably including more like positive comments. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that experience of looking back to your first time doing anything and thinking, oh, if only I had known then what I know now. I think that is a fairly universal experience, no matter what culture you're coming from. But it sounds like you've really brought an awareness to your teaching and your own practices as a student. And so thank you for sharing those stories. What about you, Anna? I'm curious, how has your experience been in terms of maybe group projects or participating in class discussions? Have you experienced any intercultural miscommunications, and how have you navigated those?
Yeah, most definitely. Connecting a little bit to Eunju's point, one thing that really did strike me as different in academic context, because I have gone to school in Russia for a couple of months before I fully moved here, is that there's a much larger emphasis again on group work, and more specifically on presentations. Because back in Russia, you do get a lot of academic context, but it's mostly assessed through tests and essays, and the seminars, I think, only now are finally being introduced a little bit into the curriculum. So especially like for myself and also for my parents, when they found out that in my grade 1 class I have to make a project about who I want to be when I grow up, that was a kind of that was kind of, I wouldn't say a shock for all of us, but it was kind of like, okay, how do we navigate this? What is a project? How do we do it? So in terms of group work, like, because I've had this sort of firsthand experience young, I've been able to become accustomed to kind of the group work and projects that are needed to happen within university. But one thing that kind of was called, I guess, culturally miscommunicated sometimes is because I found that Canadian culture focuses a lot on participation. For example, if you are part of a club, etc., you have to be there at social events, and for example, or those kind of events, and participate to just kind of show your involvement with something that you are interested in, and that you're building the connections and the support system. In Russian culture, that hasn't been, I wouldn't say it's developed to such a big an extent. So I had to learn sort of that, like, if I'm part of a certain club, and I participate in the regular meetings. But if I don't come to social events, that's not necessarily good as well. Because then they're wondering, oh, why are you not here? Are you not interested? So again, I had to kind of learn to and become accustomed to it over time. And especially with group projects, you also have to be very involved sometimes in your group chats, even if you're. It's not only reading the messages, it's also responding to them and kind of saying, okay, yes, I've got this message, etc. So just keeping up this social context, because previously when I first started, the fact that I wasn't responding, they thought that meant like I wasn't being involved in the project, even though I was reading everything and I was still like on top of the loop. But my group mates didn't know that, for example. So I had to learn how to like be more engaged and open up, and at least send a thumbs up to that to say that like, yes, I'm also in the loop.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, I think, you've touched on something really important there, which is there's so much more involved in being academically successful than just getting the work done. Well, there's all these interpersonal pieces and social etiquette pieces that come into play. And I'm going to say that I think we have one of our other panelists on the phone. Samad, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry to be very late. I have a technical problem with Zoom. I'm so sorry about that one.
No, I apologize. So we've been experiencing this problem. We've been requiring folks to join with their Queen's Net ID, and the authentication piece seems to be a little finicky. So I apologize for that, Samad. But you are welcome. Would you take a second to introduce yourself to our group and maybe share a little bit about your story and your relationship with Canadian academic culture?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. First of all, I apologize to be late to join the meeting. My name is Samad. I'm originally from Iran. I finished my Bachelor and a Master of Science in my home country, and then I worked in industry for over 10 years. Later on, I decided to come to Canada. Actually, there was a kind of interesting how I joined to academic environment in Canada. I tried actually, when I came to Canada, I tried to find a job. So it's because of maybe my background, academic background, studies was out of country, out of Canada, so I couldn't grab jobs. I was in touch with one of the Queen's University supervisor. He gave me a very short project to do, and when I finished that project, he suggested me to continue my education in Canada at Queen's University in PhD. That is why I started my PhD at Queen's University, actually. The one of the reasons actually in terms of the cultural difference and languages, I would say that when I entered to Queen's University, because I was aware from educational environment over at that time maybe 13 years, I was actually in stress, honestly, that how can I cope myself with new environment. Not only the new environment, how can I actually cope myself with well again in educational environment. I figured out at that time that after maybe it took me 2 years that beyond language barriers, it was a kind of that how to actually introduce myself in Canadian culture and community, specifically in Kingston, that it is different from big cities like Toronto or Vancouver, because when you are in Toronto, for example, there are lots of immigrants and you don't feel actually alone. However, at in Kingston, the story is different. Nowadays, much you see lots of immigrant, much more immigrant in Kingston, but maybe 12 years old, 12 years ago, it was not such place. I appreciate for immigrant service of Kingston, ISCA, as well as CPS. At that time, CPS has a wonderful program, student advisor program. They helped me a lot, and then I was referred to student wellness services. It was a cross-cultural counselor. She's very amazing counselor. She helped me actually to fit myself, to try to adjust myself for academic environment, with how Canadian things, how to interact with Canadians. And this was actually one of my story, I would say. Other thing is that because when I came to Canada, I was married and I had children. So beyond the academic environment, I have to deal with the things was around my family in Kingston, Canada. I recall that my daughter, when she was just in grade 4, she had a problem with language. For example, her teacher told me that she has enough knowledge about the curriculum, but for example, when she wanted to explain something in a liquid, she was using a word water. And that was make kind of that very weird and maybe fun for her classmates. There was a pressure at that time. So, but little by little, I would say, if you can get connected with the right places, right people, you can later on to adjust yourself with new environment. So yeah, this is what I wanted to mention about the.
Thank you so much, Samad. Thank you for that introduction and for finding a way to get connected with us. It's really interesting. You and Anna are kind of on opposite ends of the same spectrum, where Anna moved to Canada as a young child and navigated those cultural differences with family who were from outside the cultural context, and you're the parent in the situation trying to navigate both being a university student in the Canadian context yourself, as well as supporting your children and your family in this environment. So really, really interesting. And I appreciate that you shared all the services that you've accessed with us, and Dr. Aruna Makana at Wellness Services. That's wonderful. Unju, I'm going to start with you. I'm thinking how so much, again, of academic success depends on what happens outside of the classroom. Are there any services or programs or clubs that you've tried, or was there anything particularly helpful for you in your acculturation process here at Queen's?
So I have that overlap. So I would also recommend like Student Wellness Service Center and counseling there. To add a little bit about that, so sometimes like whenever you go through some hardship in terms of academic things, I feel like it is so easy to blame on yourself, because it is you who makes mistakes, and it is you who writes in English so poorly. It is you who did not really understand the lecture, etc., etc. And that makes you less confident about yourself, and it makes you so small and kind of, I don't know, like hard to focus on your strength. And that means it's hard to love yourself and believe in yourself that you can do this. But with like my counselor, the same person, Dr. Aruna Makana, I try to kind of understand the difficulties that I'm experiencing is a natural thing. Like it's not me thing. Like, and it happens to many other international students, and that there are a lot of good things about me. And that kind of gives you a power to keep this going and not give up. And I think that counseling is especially good for international students, because sometimes it's hard for them to navigate through all these cultural differences, and it's kind of hard to distinguish which is just like this, which is just the outside factor or just me. And then with her, I try to navigate like, oh yeah, this is something that I cannot change. I have to adapt to it, or like, and then she helps me find a way to adapt to it. And sometimes I feel like, oh, okay, this is me thing. So I also work on that through counseling. So yeah, I feel I strongly encourage Student Wellness Center and counseling service there. And I also recommend like SAS, so Student Academic Service Center. Yay! So especially in terms of writing, I feel like in my culture, we write very differently from like Canadian writing. So we sometimes have that difficulty navigating through that cultural differences, because what I write was, so like, for example, if I write an essay, sometimes others find it hard to find the important thing, like what is your main idea in this essay? And then I'm like, it is there, but it's obviously it's not obvious. So like I sometimes visit the center and I try to fix my essay, try to sound more like in a the Canadian way. And sometimes because my English is not my first language, sometimes the idea is there, but you just don't know how to articulate it well in English sentences. So staffs there are like super nice, super kind and helpful, and you learn how to use your English better. So I'm always like that's what I wanted to say, but like you just framed it so nicely. So that means I learned something. So yeah, like I strongly encourage these two centers, like SAS and Student Wellness Center.
Thank you for that emphatic plug. I appreciate that. And I think you touch on a really critical tension that as an employee at SAS, at Student Academic Success Services, I see this every day with students, where there's this tension between wanting to encourage internationalized students to embrace their culture and we want to acknowledge the value of diversity and how there's more than one right way to do something, right? There is no single right way. There's lots of different ways to approach anything, including an academic essay. However, we're working within this particular context, and as an internationalized student, you need to be academically successful in your program, where, if we're being honest and realistic, there are certain expectations around conventions and style and approaches. And so it sounds like through accessing these services, Unju and Samad, you've been able to bring more awareness to the environment that you're in, or rather increase your awareness about the Queen's environment, and figure out what are the expectations in terms of how you approach not only the work on paper, but also the system, the university system overall. And I'm interested in your experience. Are there any resources or services that you've found particularly helpful in terms of acculturating to Queens, not necessarily from a heritage culture difference, but as the undergraduate student on our panel, that cultural shift going from the public education system into the post-secondary education system is pretty significant as well. Any thoughts on that?
For sure. So I mean, I'm going to follow Eunju's advice and also talk a little bit about Student Academic Success Services, because I went for a slightly different approach. I've decided that I wanted to become part of its volunteer force. So in my second year, I've joined to become the peer learning assistant. So being able to help my fellow students with learning strategies such as time management, procrastination, etc. So I found that was an interesting position in terms of, like, at the same time learning what the academic context was about at Queen's, and also being able to I guess kind of integrate some of the strategies that I've learned there into my brain by teaching it to others. Like, for example, I remember it was an eye opener to me in my second year. I had to lead a seminar about how you write a persuasive essay. And that's where I first learned about the university academic discourse. And I remember that being like a light bulb opener for me in my mind. I thought, oh, so this is how we interact in academia. wow, I really want to share that with everybody else so that they understand it with me too. So I guess that it kind of helped. It helped to both understand and to build confidence in kind of like my own skills and being able to navigate all the different coursework that I had to do, and also kind of like see what my place within the university academia as a student could be. But in terms of actually being acculturized to Queen's culture itself, the club that really did help me with that was Queen's bands. Yes, I've joined Queen's bands at around the same time that I joined SAS. I play the bagpipes there currently. So I have the reason why I wanted to join in the first place is because I wanted to practice an instrument that I really liked, but also do it with others who also do a similar thing, and also in a social context, because Queen's Bands has a very big reputation of also having a lot of different events together, being to build that network with each other, and also promoting the spirit of Queens at different events, right? So that experience just helped me understand what the university was in a more social context. For example, it helped me understand the kind of balance that is needed between school work and the more, I guess, social activities. Because I was in danger of becoming one of those students that who was always in the library, always only studying, right? Only working on this, only working on that, which I mean, can work for some, but also at the same time, it's really important to have that variation and to be able to build, make new friends, etc. So that it really helped me in that context as well. So two different clubs, but two different aspects to the identity as a university student.
Oh, thank you so much. That's a Russian bagpipe player. I love it. You're full of surprises, Anna, always, always. Samad, before you joined the call, we were talking a little bit about intercultural communications and the potential for miscommunication. And you touched a little bit on this when you were introducing yourself, but I just want to come back to this idea because I think often people think about cultural differences in terms of these things they can see on the surface. I'm sure some of you in the audience today have seen that iceberg model of culture where above the water you've got the clothing and music and food and language, but really there's so much below the surface that distinguishes one culture from another in terms of etiquette and expectations and our understandings of respect and authority and these other intangible things. So Samad, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about when you first transitioned to the university here in Canada, what were some of these deeper cultural differences you experienced and maybe how did you navigate them? And you are on mute, so you will have to press 6 on your phone. Hopefully that works.
Hello?
There you go. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sure. Well, I can't recall honestly now, but for terms of the indifferent type of the cultures, I would say I recall at that time, I found fortunately the staff and even grad students and faculty member of Queen's University, they have had a very high understanding of the different cultures, different way of things about matters, and they respected to my thoughts. And when, for example, I wanted to explain something or try to say something, in my culture normally they don't go directly for the answers. They try to make kind of the story about around the subject. of discussion. But they were very patient. They were very patient with me, and they were trying to. I figured out they try actually to learn me what when I'm going to even talk to a Canadian or white European Canadian, what type of difference is in terms of the interaction with people. However, sometimes there was kind of the conflict, and again at that time there was a big misunderstanding when I was a TA. I appreciate Dr. Onima kind of helped me actually to help me solve the problems. But I learned that I should be very careful and cautious when I'm going to talk to a person that who doesn't know me, and I try to be person that not to judge people, honestly, not to judge people just in the first hand. I mean, maybe if somebody doesn't kind of ignore me, I try, or maybe, for example, when we are in the, I recall I was in the, it was a course that we had a group of the people, they wanted to work together. I was just only person that was not white Canadian. I feel they ignored me. They ignored me, and they just started a conversation together to know how to arrange the group discussion. I didn't lose my hope at that time. I just tried to be patient and could be good listener, and then when I noticed that they stuck somewhere, I just try to help and say that maybe my opinion is this one. And this little by little changed the mind of the folks who was in the group, and understood that I'm a person there, so they cannot just ignore, and maybe they give me a chance to participate and attend discussions. The other things, actually, I'm not sure that it is related for this discussion or no. For me, it is strange that here, when the undergrad students finish their terms, they try to throw on the floor clothes, winter clothes, jackets, and to release their, I don't know, maybe the angers or whatever it is. But for a person like me that comes from a country that or they are experience lots of the kind of pressures, it was kind of a weird, and I said that why they try to destroy, for example, winter jackets, throw on the floor, on the grounds, throw on the car. It can be used with a person that needs that one. Why do this one? Still, I don't understand for this type of the cultures that I see in, I don't know, at Queen's University. I don't know. So, yeah, sorry, this is what I would say.
I think there was a lot that you said there that's so helpful. You know, some of what stood out to me was your recommendation of patience and not rushing to judgment when someone is different. And you know, I really appreciate you sharing that experience of feeling kind of invisible in that group project and being the only visible minority, and how you tried to still assert yourself and maintain optimism. And yeah, you know, that story that you just shared at the end there about Queen students smacking their coats on the ground and that ritual, and that seeming so out of place and confusing. I think that's a very different but a very good example of how we can just normalize things that perhaps folks from other contexts have a very different perspective on. I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions, but before I do, I'm just going to kind of pass it back to Unju and Anna to see if you have any final thoughts to add. Unju, anything about your acculturative experience or being an international student at Queen's that you'd like to share with the audience?
Just to speak a little bit about the final question. So I guess the one big problem that I found when I communicate with others, like student at Queen's, is that we don't really have a common ground. It's just like what I watch, like the movies I watch, the dramas I watch, the music that I listen to are different from theirs. And somehow, like, even though they were very encouraged to talk to me, like it was not like they're not trying to talk to me or something, but it was so hard to find like a conversation topic between us. And that was really frustrating at first time. But I tried to navigate starting from like small things like Netflix dramas. Like even if I don't watch, I still could see like Canada like top 1 or something like that. And then I would probably start from there. Like, have you watched that? Like, what is the story, like what is it about, or something like that. And then that slowly talking about those like small things would like bring some like more topics into the table. So that's how I navigated it. And or I would just like talk something about like a sports, like try to find some common projects on the table. But I know it is really hard, and it sounds super, like it sounds like not really hard though, because like there must be something to talk about, but it is hard. It is hard. And so if someone is going through the same thing, I would probably say that start with really small things and try to expand it from there. And at the end, probably you'll be able to find some common things that you can talk about. And and then that is the beginning of a friendship, I think. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome advice. Anna, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess kind of the final thought is that yes, we all come from different cultural contexts, from different countries, different environments, but also at the same time, it's important to remember that you're talking with the person first and foremost, because sometimes especially when you're not always comfortable with people knowing you just as, you know, the Russian friend that you have or the international friend that you have. Sometimes it's a part of a person's identity, but for others who are interacting, you don't always have to put an emphasis on that identity for it, because sometimes it's just important to be known just for who you are. As it is, and being open-minded and accepting is also very important in that kind of context as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that I think resonates with what Samad was saying too about, you know, being a human in the room, being a person there. Gabriella, I see you have a question.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Yeah, thank you for sharing from your experiences. As an immigrant to this country myself, I resonate so much with your experiences. So I'm Gabriela Ludusan, and I coordinate one of the programs that I coordinate through the Student Experience Office is a first-year mentorship program, Q Success. That's where we have a team of mentors who support first-year students to transition into university. So a couple of questions that I have for you is, one is, what advice would you give to mentors who are helping international students to transition into university? What do you think they should know that would better prepare them to support international students? And then the second part of the question is, if you were asked to advise international students who are transitioning into university to focus on maybe, let's say, 3 areas that would greatly help their transition, what would these areas be? So advice for mentors and advice for students who are transitioning.
Samad, do you want to maybe start off?
Yes. Can I talk or I'm on mute? I'm sorry, I don't know. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, it is actually it's a good question, and I would say it is a kind of that maybe tough question I want to answer now. But for sure, for transitions, it depends on the program. For example, when you are in a intensive program, for me like the PhD, that say that the PhD is just for 4 years program. You know, so this mature international married students will find himself or herself kind of difficult first to adjust with environment, with the new person transition term from the one culture to other culture, because in 4 years, the PhD students have to finish in first 2 years, finish all of the requirement of the educations, courses, Comp 1, Comp 2, comprehensive exam, and then right away just focus and push yourself just about your dissertations. This doesn't give enough time for a person to adjust himself. For me, it was a case that in the first 2 years, I was in very tremendous pressure, stress. In first term, I have to pass lots of the courses. Each course has lots of commitment, and the second term was another courses. On the same time, I have at the end of the first year, I have to complete my first comprehensive exam, and right away after 6 months, I have to go for my second comprehensive exam. And beyond actually those other things, there was lots of the other issues around my family, in community. Well, I don't know it is possible or no, but I would say that maybe the Queens needs to a little bit change the expectation, or make a kind of the difference between the international students coming with different countries who is not actually single. Even with the single students, it's different. For single students, stay all day and night in the lab. They have no any commitment out of the lab or Queen's University. But for married students, has children, family, he has to kind of that consider here Queens is my workplace, and after workplace, I should be someone. I am the other person. I have just other commitments. But when there is no chance, actually, you don't give any time frame for this adjustment. For example, instead of 4 years to be 5 years for international students with financial support, this would be big difference. We can make big differences. This is one I can say. The other thing is that in terms of the financial help and support. Well, I know that the financial support has adjusted just for the single students, and the money is granted by supervisor or scholarly studies just for the single students, but it cannot be enough for international students, and this makes another actually pressure for international students, that how can actually manage the things, everything, pay rents, tuition fees, living expenses. Yeah, this is maybe I would suggest for a coordinator that maybe might be discussed with the high level of the Queen's University, that 4 years PhD is good in some way, but in other way, it doesn't make sense for the other type of the students, specifically international students, adjust themselves and have the good productivity if they want at the end see an international students successfully finish PhD and graduated.
Thank you so much, Samad. Yeah, I think, whether you're a mentor or mentee, thinking about how there's all of these extenuating circumstances that impact our situation, and it's not always a matter of the academics, but are there dependents, children, financial concerns, these other things that kind of take us away. Are there any other questions for our panelists today?
I mean, I myself, I can elaborate a little bit more on
Sure.
question. Just in terms of the relationship kind of between the mentor and the mentee, especially like if it's a very large cultural difference, it's important to be able to build that trust, right? And I believe that for an international student, for like to trust you, it's important for you to have like an appreciation and at least a basic understanding of their culture and where they're coming from. So I guess like I'd say an important like question could be like even during the first meeting when you're first just getting to know each other, is asking like what kind of either to TV shows or books or any sort of other entertainment do you like watching kind of in your own language or from your own country that you've been in? Because a lot of the time the kind of entertainment that is provided, it gives an understanding to what the culture can value, what is it, what it can particularly be looking for. So that kind of question, it shows like interest in knowing a little bit more, but it also will provide the mentor with key information of like, for example, if the mentee is having a social interaction problem, they don't quite understand, at least be able to kind of find the approach and how do we bridge what my mentee understands of like how interaction is supposed to be, and how to give them understanding how it may differ from a more Canadian context. So like given a little bit of that sort of thing. And from the mentee's perspective, I guess since you're moving, you've moved to a completely different country, it's going to be very difficult to find an environment that is exactly how you want for it to be to uphold you as in your culture and how you were brought up. So I guess it's important to know what you want from a service like Success, but also at the same time having an open mind, like about that, so that like you'll be able to adjust your expectations as things come up if needs to be, because like adjustment to some Queen's culture or even the Canadian academic culture, it will also need at least a little bit of an adjustment of your own self, because you're always learning something. You're always learning how to understand, how to work in it. So I guess having that open mind is also very important. Yeah, so kind of like curiosity and understanding from the mentor, and an open-mindedness and willing also to learn from the mentee as well. I don't know if that helps, but that's my 2 cents for that.
Thank you so much. I'm mindful of the time. I had said in the chat we'd go 5 minutes over since we started about 5 minutes late. And so thank you folks for staying on. Thank you to our amazing panelists. Your contributions were so valuable. It was wonderful to hear your stories. And thank you to everyone who joined us today and for your engagement in the conversation. We really appreciate you getting involved in International Education Week. This is the first time we are doing this event, but we're very hopeful that it can turn into an annual thing. And so please do take a moment to fill out that feedback form. We would love to hear how your experience was, but also what you'd like to see in future years. If you have any questions about International Education Week, you can contact myself or Lydia Schoolstad. And thank you for your time. And I hope I'll see you at other sessions throughout the week. Have a great day, everyone.